I've got a confession to make.
Okay.
I have been guilty of doing this on more than one occasion in the past, showing up to a rehearsal where I am either supposed to run the whole thing or supposed to run a portion of the thing. I'm kind of the person who's supposed to say, okay, now we're doing this, now we're doing that, with no plan in mind whatsoever.
Hmm.
And I thought that was okay because as long as we were all in the same place and all playing bagpipes, or I've got to admit also, often it was practice chanters and pads, because without a plan, you kind of get lazy, I guess, that it would be okay, that it was still worthwhile. And maybe it was,
Right.
maybe to some degree it was, but maybe more on the social kind of plane of things, not so much for improving sound, improving musicianship, etc. So thinking about that as like, that was obviously a fail on my part.
You're
What
too
maybe
hard on
what
yourself, Jim. You're too hard on yourself.
You're too kind. You're too kind, Andrew. But, like, what it does have me thinking, like, what is an ideal rehearsal session, you know? A while ago, we did talk about, like, a model for an ideal personal practice session, but, of course, as everybody likes to point out, you practice on your own so you can go rehearse with the group. So then what should the rehearsal look like? Is it
Yeah.
all drills all the time or, what kinda how do I break that up, and what's a golden rehearsal session look like with a pipe band?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of things are probably worth just throwing out there. Thing number one is it really depends on the type of organization that you're in, right? So, like,
Mm.
I think that some organizations are just like more, it says pipe band on the door, but it's really more of just like a social club that does a little bagpipes to generate the excuse to get out of the house and have a couple of beers or something.
And hey, maybe that's what's needed. That's okay,
Yeah,
right?
maybe that's what's needed and maybe that's okay. But like also I would suggest that in that case, you're the Jim Moyer model of winging it and not really necessarily having a goal at all. Like that's probably perfectly fine and maybe almost what the constituents would prefer. It's maybe we don't even have to get the pipes out today and we just, you know, do a little practice chanters and then, call it a
Hang
night
out and
because
see what
I've had a
happens
long
is
day.
a model.
Yeah,
Mm.
so, I think that there's definitely probably places in the world where that's the model, and to your point, maybe that's okay. However, that is not how I'm wired at all, 0%. If that happens, that'll be the last band practice I go to. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's not my jam, so just that would be a preface here. So we're playing in a band that is, concerned about and interested in, improving and producing good
Yeah.
performances and playing music at a high quality. So let's make that a prerequisite. And no judgment on bands where that might not be the case. But if that is the case, and that leads me to the next golden rule, which is band practice should be about developing the group and not about developing individuals. That's the next
Mm.
place my mind goes, right?
That
So,
that's one, yeah, that I've seen that, like, as a spectator, and I've been sucked into that before as well, where it's like, you just end up having, 12, 15, maybe 20 people in the room, and all the focus is on one person.
yeah.
And sometimes I don't know, like, there can be something beautiful about everybody pulling together to help each other, but, like, it can't be that week after week after week after week.
No, and it should really never be that. And I think maybe more commonly, it's for people who like maybe aren't even aware somehow that their drone tuning pins, need to be tunable with one hand and not too loose and not too tight. And it's
Mm.
like, man, we really kind of have to we need to check those boxes, right? And then, if Old Rustic Bridge is a tune that you're supposed to have memorized
Man.
by now. If Frank, and then sorry to all the listeners out there named Frank, but if Frank shows up and doesn't know Old Rustic Bridge yet, then that's going to derail and kind of ruin what you wanted to be able to achieve altogether. So once we've decided that we're a band that cares about how we sound and we're going to work to get better on an ongoing basis, the next thing that needs to be somehow fostered is individuals come prepared to band practice, with the basics down, to a
Yeah.
reasonable degree. In Inverary, when I play in Inverary, I mean, every single person in that band has achieved and continues to achieve an extraordinarily high level of play. And that all happens before you walk in the door.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, I'm not sure how long you're going to last. And by the way, I'm sure that's true in Field Marshal Montgomery. I know for a fact it's true in the SFU pipe band. So, like, that's what we're talking about at the high levels. But even at the low levels, you can maintain your bagpipe on your own time. You can
Mhm.
learn. In a recent episode, we talked about achieving a good sweet spot and learning to do that as a habit. So individuals can do that. They might not be professional level players yet, but they can do that. And when it comes time to learn the music, they can do that, and they can do that on their own, okay, without taking time out of band practice in order to achieve that. I feel like sometimes there's people who don't have a ton of time,
Mhm.
but those are the ones who need to come to band half an hour early to get a little bit of extra help from the pipe major, with the reason being that we got to knock that out before band practice starts. And when I've been pipe major of various bands, that would always have been something I would do. Is I would be the first one there usually, and
Mm.
then other early comers would have a chance to run a couple things by me or get help with their pipes or whatever. And sometimes I'd be proactive if it's just me and some other guy. It's like, hey, strike those things up. Let's see how they're sounding. But anyway, that's all in the spirit of making sure when band practice starts that we're actually ready to work on the things that the band needs to work on.
I appreciate that. I like the idea, and it's come up in these conversations multiple times of like each individual needs to take care of the things that are individual first, and then the group can become this bigger thing that's larger than the sum of its parts. And I don't know if it's an encouraging thing to point out, but I'm just thinking about the new piper or the recently like reactivated piper who hasn't played for a long time. There can be it can be hard to feel confident enough that you're a good enough player to go to band practice sometimes. And
Hmm.
I feel like it's maybe important to point out that like blowing at the right pressure and cleaning up your fingers and stuff like that, that should all be a focus and you should be getting better at that on your own, of course. But while you're working on that, everybody can have a well-maintained machine. You
Hmm.
can take really good care of your bagpipes, and speaking from some little bit of experience, I can say that if everybody showed up with, like, a tight bag that's not leaking air and
Hmm.
tuning pins that are, like, not just slipping in different parts or
That's
aren't
right.
impossible to move, that makes a huge
A
difference, and it's
huge
very
difference.
much appreciated.
And then once you set that expectation, there's no real excuse for anyone in the band to struggle with that, because you've got two options. Option one, you don't have to be a great player to take care of that on your own. Okay.
Mhm.
But then option two is, even if for some reason you can't take care of it on your own, or maybe to your point, you're just not comfortable yet. Like, I'm not comfortable seasoning my pipes. But like, everyone is capable of calling up the pipe major and saying, hey, can you help me out with this before band this week? Everyone's capable of that. And so that's what we've got to do. And then to your point, that's going to make a huge difference. When we work together as a band, I think
Mhm.
if it's really early in the season, okay, having a learning session for the band is great. It's fine. It's no problem. For example, we're going to be playing the Old Rustic Bridge this year, but it's brand new. So, come to band practice as prepared as you can be with Old Rustic Bridge, but we're going to work on it together and with the music. So bring your music stand or whatever, and then we can work through Old Rustic Bridge. We might even bring the drummers in, even though no one has it memorized yet. We might just hammer it out to see how it feels,
Yeah.
and maybe Billy will bring the harmonies that he wrote and see if we like how it sounds. But you could have these sort of developmental sessions, right? We can do that. And if that's the goal of the practice, then that could be a practice well spent. That might be one type of goal. Another goal might be to set the sound because you have a performance coming up. So, in a practice where the main goal is to just get a good sound, we don't have to really overthink it from there. For example, typically leading up to a big competition, Inverary and District will spend a lot of time setting the sound, getting the chanters in, and some time, but frankly, quite minimal in terms of getting the run throughs of the sets. I mean, you might get
Mm.
one run through of each set that you're going to play on the weekend, and maybe a couple of little highlights, things that we want to make sure that are good. But when you're coming up to a performance, it can no longer be the goal of your practice to like work on people's learning of the tune or getting people to play the
Yeah.
tune good. So, so structuring that, that's the name of the game.
Well, and if variety is the spice of life, then I like the idea that throughout a calendar year, what exactly happens at rehearsal will change. I mean, that
Yes.
keeps it interesting and it's applicable to whatever is coming up on the band calendar. Do you feel like there's value in having a session not be too short or too long? Like, I've been in bands where rehearsal is 2 hours standard and others where it's an hour standard. Do you feel like there is any such thing as too much or too little?
Oh, for sure. Definitely too much. I mean, we used to do 8 hour like marathon practices.
Mm,
And, in a sense, that's probably okay, right? Spiritually. But you have to be, if you're going to be there for a long period of time, you have to have a pretty specific plan. And you can't ask the bagpipes to sound particularly great anywhere beyond, let's say, 90 minutes of
mm.
practice,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Anywhere beyond 90 minutes, the pipes are going to be soaking wet and you're going to maybe be doing more damage to the cause than good because now people go home with soaking wet pipes and only 6 out of 10 of the pipers are actually properly taking care of them as a result. And so the other four, their pipes are all kind of messed up and then they are having trouble practicing at home on their own because their pipes got messed up from the super long practice. And then then what's required is another super long practice the next week to try to like address all the problems.
Mm,
So there definitely is an optimal length of time, and that might change here and there. And the more practice channels you play, the more time you can squeeze out. But I like thinking about a rehearsal in, let's say, a 2 hour chunks. So
mm.
maybe you could do 2 2 hour chunks in a day if you're doing like a big band weekend or something. Maybe you could do
Right.
two
The,
2 hour
the the
chunks in a
band
day, but
Saturday kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, but it's worth thinking about it in 2 hour chunks and then how might you structure that? I think I would start with just getting the pipes going at the beginning, getting some warm, moist air into those pipes, and then just play a couple things fairly casually and then let the pipes sit for a while, maybe while you do some practice channel work. And then for the last 45 minutes, maybe you tune the pipes up fairly well, and then maybe bring some drummers in for a couple of things. Maybe that would be the basic arc of a practice session. Maybe. And then maybe there's other things, maybe you do only a short period of time on the practice channels so that you can do an hour of tuning. Now, that might
Mm,
seem like a lot, but remember, band practice is to rehearse the things that the band has to be able to deliver on. So we're not going to
yeah.
run through the Stress Bay 47 times, right? That's stuff that at least 40 of those 47 Stress Bay reps are things you can do individually with people outside of band practice time, or it's stuff they can work on their own. We want to really take that valuable band practice time. Think about how hard it is to get everybody in the room, right? We really want to spend that time on things that the ensemble needs to focus on specifically,
That's a
right?
good
So,
point.
so maybe you've
So
got
maybe
some
even like
breaks.
marching into the circle or something like
That's
that.
right. Marching into the circle, maybe, especially for less experienced players who that's not automatic for them. Like in Inverary, we don't
Mhm.
do that because everyone's played in bands for so long. You just, you
Yeah.
usually just kind of do it once or twice on the day and you're good. But in lower grade bands where that's less familiar, yeah, it's like we're going to walk into the circle a bunch. Even something like attacks. I see pipe bands do a
Mhm.
lot of rehearsals with attacks, but those attacks should be rehearsed at home.
Mm.
So that you just do one or two attacks at band practice to confirm everything is sounding great. But it
Yeah,
shouldn't be
just
this
check in on
long,
it.
it shouldn't necessarily be this long-winded thing in the perfect world, in my opinion. But yeah, how are we going to tune the band? You know, how are
I
these
hadn't really
breaks going to go?
Right, when you
How,
say how are we gonna tune the band, it's not just, like, getting the instruments to play about right together so the next time you get together, they're pretty close. It's actually practicing the act of tuning, isn't it?
yes, absolutely.
I hadn't really put that together before, Andrew. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a thing, it's a skill set to be able to and you want it to be efficient. You want it to be as quick as you can get it,
Yes.
and quick and good. And so you gotta practice that, and you can only
Yeah.
practice that as a band. It's not that's one thing you can't do by yourself. Well, I mean,
Well,
you
and there's
kinda
two
can to some
sides.
degree, but
Yeah, there's two hemispheres of that rehearsal, just to get a little nerdy on you here and give you some food for thought. There's two hemispheres. Hemisphere number one is for the leadership of the band to rehearse the operation of the tune-up because there's a lot of moving pieces
mm,
to a successful tune-up, right? You got to get someone to tune the drones, you got to get someone to tune the channers, but the timing of tuning the channers is key. right? Because as the more you play, the more the pitch changes on you, right?
Yeah.
So the guy tuning all the chanters, he's playing basically continuously, but then the constituents in the band are basically not, right? They're basically playing very
Yeah.
little. So how are you going to balance all that? How are you going to coordinate all that? What's the plan going to be? And then can we deliver? And so for the
Mm.
leadership of the band, that's really and there's only one place they can rehearse that, and that's in the band hall. So you'll see good bands, you'll see them spend a lot of time practicing their tuning. And the reason
Mm.
why is that's the only place it can be rehearsed. And then
Yeah.
meanwhile, the other hemisphere of that process is like me, I'm just a, rank and file guy in Inverary, right? My job is to practice not crapping my pants when it's my turn to get tuned, right? Which is a very hard
Yeah.
thing. So for me, I spend a lot of time visualizing, okay, like let's pretend this is the day of the worlds. This
Yeah.
is my chance. This is my chance for so-and-so to come up and tune my chanter with me. This is my chance to, produce a good tone in the tone zone. Don't forget about the
Mhm.
tone zone,
Mhm.
Jim. But
Get
this
in
is
the
my
tone
chance
zone.
to produce some good tone in the tone zone, and for the person to catch any out of tune notes that can be tuned. Like I need to not be blowing all wild and crazy. I need to not be so nervous that I can't produce a good tone, et cetera, et cetera. So as the constituent, that's where I get to rehearse that. You can't rehearse that on your own. You can't in your tuning room by yourself. I can get my pipes in tune, but I can't visualize the process of someone stepping up and tuning me, and I can't focus on blowing a nice steady pressure regardless of what I hear, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Like those are skills that we need band practice for those skills specifically.
Mm.
And then just to kind of hammer home the point, I do not need band practice to get my terluiths and my grips and my bubbly notes to sound good. You see the
Mm.
difference?
Yeah. Totally
I,
see the
I,
difference. Yeah, that
I
makes
do
it clear.
not need band practice for that. I will do that on my own. And if I have trouble doing it on my own, there are people in my band who would be totally stoked to sit down with me before band practice, or maybe even at some other time during the week, to help me with my bubbly notes. Like they're going to be thrilled
Mhm.
to do that. But it would be inappropriate for me to bring that baggage to band practice and to be infringing on people's time. That would be a mistake. And it happens. Of course it happens. Like, oh crap, I'm playing the third bar of that completely wrong. And I had no
Mhm.
idea. And like that, that's going to happen at band practice from time to time. Or like, I thought my pipes were sounding good, but man, for some reason, they're just going wildly out of tune. Of course that's going to happen. But those are things that at least in spirit, we want to prioritize outside of band practice. So when we come to band, the band is able to focus on those band specific things.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point, Andrew, that like when there is help needed for personal things, for bubbly notes and such. Why am I? It sounds like I'm saying like, yo, your bubbly note, that's a personal problem, right? But like
That sounds
when
like
that kind of
a you problem.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But when there is help needed for that kind of stuff, even for instrument setup and stuff like that, I'm thinking like for the new player, I know that someone you can feel sheepish going to ask for help. But like just remember that everybody in your band who's already been playing for a while, especially like the pipe major, right? But like everybody who's been doing this for a while, they've only been doing it for a while because they really love it. They are going to enjoy helping you work through any of this stuff. Like
Yeah.
nobody's gonna be like, "Oh, I don't really want to talk about bagpipes during the week. I only do it
Well,
right now."
it
We're
is
all
true that
obsessed.
sometimes the pipe major's too busy.
That
Uh,
happens for sure. Yeah.
and that's going to happen. But, pipe majors of the world, if you're too busy, no problem. But that does mean you need to delegate and be
Yeah.
comfortable delegating. Like if you're too busy to help players with their bubbly notes, you must delegate that to someone else to do. And sometimes I feel like pipe majors, probably myself included, you don't trust other people to teach someone like the right way. And so,
Mhm.
you just kind of end up in siloing yourself. But when we did the Oren Moore pipe band, it was amazing. Guys like Eric Olette and Keegan Sheehan and Carl Donnelly, these guys could really do what I needed be done, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And therefore, players who are having a hard time, they're like, "Hey, I want to work on this." I would always say like, "You need to connect with Eric Olette," or, You need to connect with Keegan. Or you could connect with me, but if I wasn't available, and even if I was available, I would usually try to delegate first because that gives other people in the band practice working on these
Yeah.
things. And then I can coach
They might be
them
the next pipe
maybe how
major.
they could teach better as well.
Mm.
It's like, cool, well, just when you do work on the bubbly note with them, make sure you're doing this, that, and make sure they're thinking about it this way. And that way, all of that points to being prepared for the band practice. And the original question you had, Jim, was how your practice might be structured. I really
Yeah.
feel like the essence of that question is more about how do we get everybody into the room ready to actually rehearse. I really think that's the linchpin. That's the bottleneck. If you actually achieve that, what you're going to do that day becomes pretty straightforward. It's like if you know everyone's there with their pipes prepared and they've worked hard, you're going to play some pipes, right? You're not going to
Yeah.
default to the practice chanter. How often do we default to the practice chanter just because it's well known?
Yeah.
It
Well,
would
it's
take
like
too much work to get the pipes
if that's
going.
all I did all week, if anything, then I'm way more tempted to just hop back on the practice channel. Like if I haven't touched my pipes since last rehearsal, I don't really feel like getting them out.
Yep. And by the way, I think a lot of top bands and so on, they take that off season and they really don't do a whole lot. And maybe that's part of the reason is because players are not going to have their band specific bagpipe firing on all cylinders during the month of December. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So usually it's just kind of like, hey guys, we'll see you in January. This is what we're playing this year. And then people kind of understand. It's like, aha, okay, cool. We'll get it going in January.
How do you feel, Andrew, about taking homework away from a band rehearsal? Whether that's like, hey, everybody listen to these 3 albums this week, for immersion.
I love that idea.
What about, I'm selling it here, what about everybody read such and such chapter of Finding Bagpipe Freedom, and we will discuss next week when we get together. Of course, there's also things like everybody work on the 3rd part of the Strasbe, that kind of stuff too. You into all of that?
So, I mean, sure, but I don't think it's that realistic. I think people play in a pipe band so that they can play bagpipes and drums and stuff. And so you usually, if there is some sort of homework that people need to do, man, it needs to be pretty straightforward, definitely related to bagpiping, and people need to clearly see the benefit of it. It would be cool if we lived in a land of cyborgs that were stoked about pipe band book club, but I'm not sure how realistic that is. The main thing, is like we want people to show up with a bagpipe that sounds great. We want them to show up with the tunes learned sounding great. Those are the 2 main things. And then from there, the band can achieve a lot. And then those 2 things I just said, those are 2 really hard things to get. But that would be, our homework would be surrounding those basic things, getting those basic fundamentals as good as reasonably possible considering the level of the group. And then from there, use rehearsal time to rehearse ensemble-specific issues. It's like, oh, now we need to go around the table and we need to listen to every individual play the 3rd part. Like, I get it. Sometimes that might be the right thing to do, but usually no. We want to do that individual work outside of band if we can. Maybe if you have a big band weekend, the morning is spent with the leadership of the pipe corps, working with individuals and doing those types of things. And then the afternoon could be a proper rehearsal. Like, you can be creative about it. But yeah, we want to be thinking about just from the macro perspective, the workflow and how it's all supposed to fit together. Because if we don't, we'll just end up in those situations where it's just basically a free-for-all. You don't really know what you're supposed to do. And there's 18 different levels of preparedness walking in the door. And then you just kind of default to playing a few reps and taking what you can get and spending half your time working on 2 people's drones.
Yeah, and if there's another option, a lot of times the players who want to improve or have a more focused experience will go to the other option, which it's like, hey, it's all piping, but if you want to hang on to players, that's not the situation you want.
Yes. If someone leaves your band to go play somewhere else, I think a lot of people, by the way, this is off topic. I think a lot of people get mad at the other band, but it's your own damn fault, right? It's your own damn fault. And maybe that's like, if you love someone, you should set them free. So if someone leaves a grade 3 band to
Sure,
go
yeah.
play in a grade 1 band, I mean, if you
That's
step,
yeah, hey,
I get it. Like I understand you're
mhm,
going to miss that person, but that's good for them, hopefully.
yeah,
But then
yeah,
if the rival band poaches your players, don't get mad at the rival band. You got to make it so your band is the enjoyable band to play with. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to
yeah,
do.
so there's some wise saying that goes something like, "To get a person to move, you don't need to destroy the house they currently have, just
Right.
build a better house, and they'll move into it of their own, of their own will."
Absolutely.
So make your pipe band the coolest house on the block,
Yeah.
and that's yeah.
And I do feel like within reason, right? Like if you have a grade 4 pipe band, I think players that are at a grade 3 level, they might prefer playing in your grade 4 band. If it's a band that's set up well and operates well and you can feel that forward momentum. So it's like the grade level isn't that important. It's it's the machine, for lack of a better word, that you build that like is able to move forward and improve. I think
Mm,
that's what excites people within reason. Now, if you've got a grade
mhm.
4 band and someone in that band is capable of playing in a grade 1 band, you have to understand that's eventually where they're going to go.
Of course, yeah.
And you should want that, and maybe
Yeah,
once you become a grade 2 band, maybe you don't want that as much and you want them to stay in your grade 2 band to help you become eventually a grade 1 band. But that's all on you. That's all, the environment that you foster. And this is coming from someone who, as a pipe major, probably had there were definitely things I probably could have improved.
and it's worth considering too, like, I mean, you never know what's gonna happen in the future, and so maintaining a good relationship with your players when they go elsewhere, it's worthwhile for
Yeah.
this is me saying in my opinion, for your own health anyway, like, maintain the friendship, why not?
Hmm.
But also, as far as your band goes, like, who knows if if you're in a grade 5 or grade 4 band, and this player's capable of playing with a grade 2 band, and they go play with a grade 2 or grade 1 band for a while, and then something changes in their life that they don't have time for that anymore, you might have a really great pipe major coming back to your band to bring a lot of great ideas from a
For
higher
sure.
grade band. And so if you've burned that bridge, like, no, don't burn that bridge. Leave the door open so they can come back because they might bring back some treasures for you and your group.
Yeah, I feel like that's a topic for another day, Jim, because
Fair enough.
that's a deep rabbit hole. We shouldn't go too far down it at the moment. We should let this be concise. Well, let's call it in there for today. Just a couple of thoughts about, I mean, what did we talk about? We talked about just a couple of thoughts about making your band rehearsals as effective as they
Yeah.
can be.
Has to do with your personal responsibilities that you have in order to make it so your rehearsal can be good, and then
Hmm.
what ought you to be focusing at a band rehearsal, and what ought to be other stuff that happens at home.
Yeah. One analogy to bring the point home. If you were putting together a basketball team, how much of your basketball team's practice time should be spent developing my ability to shoot the 3-pointer? Like maybe there are times where there's a little bit of that is appropriate. But generally speaking, you want me to come onto the team already able to shoot the threes, right? And then during basketball practice, where we actually work as a team, we'll be practicing those things that are specific to the operation of the team. Like what plays are we going to run? What's the general strategy? So on and so forth. So
Mhm.
there's a time and a place for everything. And I feel like the band practice hall often is just kind of a convoluted mess instead of being focused on those key things.
Hey everybody, Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.